I'm so glad each and every one could be here today, and I'm in no rush. We're going to stay here both for presentation as well as question and answer. This is a very historic moment in which we live. But I hope I say something that not simply empowers and enables and ennobles you, but most importantly unsettles you. Because this is an educational institution. Education in its deepest sense, what the Greeks call paideia, P-A-I-D-E-I-A, is about unsettling people. It's about unnerving people and unhousing people so that you muster the courage to learn how to think for yourself, to think critically, cut against the grain, engage in that formation of attention so you can move from the superficial to the substantial. You move from the frivolous to the serious. You move from the bling bling to the quest for wisdom and justice and truth, which means you have to engage in a turning of the soul. Bergen Community College is about trying to convince people to engage in a courageous turning of the soul so they engage the self with reality and morality and memory and history so that you become a mature person and become more decent and compassionate rather than living your life on the surface with truncated forms of materialism and hedonism and narcissism and rapacious individualism. No, we got to grow up, and we're living in a moment in the country right now. It's clear that America has grown rich. Some folk have grown very rich. America's growing old. But the question is whether America has what it takes to grow up. And I'm not just talking about an election. I'm talking about what it means to really engage deep issues. The social misery out there, the dilapidated housing, the disgraceful school systems, especially in chocolate cities, not enough jobs with a living wage, unavailable health care, unavailable child care, bonds that hold people together, transforming hoods into neighborhoods. I grew up in the neighborhoods. Too many folk grow up in hoods. Neighborhood has ties of sympathy and bonds of empathy. Hoods are survival of the slickest. Bullets flowing, tied to the prison industrial complex, been expanding exponentially. Paideia, education in its deepest sense, is how do we become awake? How do we become hypersensitive to the pain of others? And most importantly, in a democratic project, how do we have a substantial conception of the public good and recognize we either hang together or we hang separately? That's the challenge in which we find ourselves. So I want to begin on a Socratic note, especially for the young brothers and sisters of all colors. A Socratic note. Line 38A of Plato's Apology. The unexamined life is not worth living. Every student, not just here at Bergen Community College, not just at Princeton, every student who's wrestling with the move from womb to tomb has to wrestle with the question of examining their selves. The Greek actually says that the unexamined life is not a life for the human, And we're at a moment now, if we don't come to terms with the meaning of being human, that's a tough question. It's a frightening question, and especially in a market-driven society so obsessed with buying and selling and making and mending and promoting and advertising. We don't have time to wrestle with deep questions of paideia and education, beginning with what does it mean to be human? So I'm going to throw this at you. What does it mean to be a featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious creature born between urine and feces? That's who we are. Put on my three-piece suit if I want to and walk around like I'm some Professor X or Y. If it wasn't for my mama's love push that got me out, I wouldn't be here. And that's true for you too. One day your body and mine will be the culinary delight of terrestrial worms unless you're out for cremation. Death. And the fundamental question you'll ever have to come to terms with is what kind of person will I be between womb and tomb? What kind of choice will I make in terms of character, integrity, magnanimity? What kind of legacy will I leave? You're not here that long. No one gets out of space and time alive. And it means then that you have to learn how to die in order to live, even though in the end we all die. Education at the deepest level is about wrestling with dogma and assumptions and presuppositions that you have to let go. And when you let go of certain dogma and presuppositions and assumptions, that's a form of death so that you can be reborn and revitalized and undergo maturation. I know students here at this grand institution, you recall those moments when you leave your class and you recognize that your worldview rests on pudding. On pudding. You have been pushed so far against the wall after reading Shakespeare's Hamlet and Toni Morrison's Beloved that you can't take it. It hurts. You've got to examine yourself. When you give up certain assumptions that you have, it's a form of death. You to be reborn, better. You know, Montaigne, the great French philosopher, used to say, to philosophize, to fall in love with wisdom, is to learn how to die in order to live more critically, more decently. He or she who learns how to die unlearns slavery. And one of the challenges, especially for young people, that there's a sense in which we don't want to muster the courage to think critically, to examine our assumptions and presuppositions. Look at the dogma right now of free market fundamentalism that has been reigning for the last 35 years during the age of Reagan, during the age of conservative rule, during the age of right-wing hegemony. Ascribing magical powers to the markets, have a problem, marketize, privatize, deregulate the market, allow it to be unregulated because it regulates itself. Lo and behold, it can take care of the major social problems. And where have we found ourselves in the last month? In catastrophic circumstances. Even our dear fellow citizen Alan Greenspan, who was the avatar and exemplar of the dogma of free market, acknowledges, well, now there's no flaw. Oh, you don't say. You don't say, huh? And all of that wealth that's been generated in the 1% at the top with billions and billions of dollars, and yet 21% of our precious children of all colors living in poverty in the richest nation in the history of the world. That's a moral disgrace. It's a moral abomination. You can break that down. 38% of brown precious children living in poverty. 39% of black precious children, and let us never forget our red brothers and sisters, indigenous people, 42% of their children living in poverty in the richest nation in the history of the world. Where's the market? Look at the health care problem. 46 million fellow citizens, no access whatsoever. 50% of all the bankruptcies have to do with medical costs escalating. Markets can get sick, you know. Dogma, blinding, willful blindness, deliberate ignorance of not allowing persons to keep track of something called public good and common interest, the things that hold us together. And of course, we won't even talk about Katrina. I looked at that Superdome, I could just see the backdrop of the history of slave ships and black bodies hanging from trees. Black life, so little value. And we're not talking just about incompetence. We're also talking about indifference. In the age of Ronald Reagan, that began in 1980 when Ronald Reagan went to Mississippi and declared himself running for president and said, in the name of states' rights, and states' rights has always been a cold word for keeping track of Negroes. Ku Klux Klan endorsed him the next day. He said, I'm not crazy about it, but you've got to do that, fine.